Man, I gotta be honest, this fight left a bad taste in my mouth. Magomed Ankalaev is the new UFC light heavyweight champion, but can we really say he dominated Pereira? Because after watching that fight and breaking it down round by round, I think there's a real case that you could argue that Alex won. Now, before people start screaming, "Cope," I'm not saying that this was some massive robbery. I'm not saying that at all. It was a close fight, and I get why Ankalaev got the nod. But when you actually look at how the fight was scored and compare it to what's supposed to matter in MMA judging, you start seeing the issue. Because let's be real, if damage is the #1 scoring criteria, why wasn't Pereira giving more credit? And if control time is the only factor when all other are equal, then why are we still seeing fighting score like this? That's the big issue here. Before I really get into breaking this fight down, I just gotta take a second and talk about something that really stood out to me in this fight. The #1 thing I really want to talk about right now is Magomed Ankalaev's counter ability. I know a lot of people see Ankalaev as this calculated, patient fighter, but man, his counters in this fight were something else. Every time Pereira tried to set something up, Ankalaev had an answer ready to go. He wasn't just marching forward blindly, he was slipping shots, rolling with strikes, and firing back with sharp counters that made Pereira hesitant. That's a big deal because Pereira is one of the best pure strikers in the UFC right now. The fact that Ankalaev was able not only to hold his own, but actually make Pereira second guess his offense showed just how high his fight IQ is. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't just throwing for the sake of it. Every counter he landed was calculated and clean. But on the flip side, we gotta talk about how insane Pereira's takedown defense was in this fight. People forget that Ankalaev is supposed to be one of the best wrestlers in the division, a guy who can grind opponents down when he needs to, and yet Pereira stuffed every single takedown attempt. That's not normal. He wasn't just stopping them, he was shutting them down with ease. His ability to read the entries, use his balance, and keep the fight standing was honestly one of the most impressive things that I saw in this fight. I don't think people have realized how big of a deal that is. Pereira came into MMA as a kickboxer, and early on, we saw him struggle a bit with wrestlers. But here, against Ankalaev, of all people, not a chance. If there was ever any doubt about his ability to defend takedowns, he erased that completely. This wasn't just a good takedown defense, this was elite level. And another thing I wanted to bring up was those leg kicks. They were brutal. Every time Pereira landed one, you could see Ankalaev reacting. The way he was chopping at the calves, mixing it up to like kicks to the thighs, and just breaking down Ankalaev's base. That was textbook Pereira right there. If he had been a little bit more aggressive, if he had followed up with more after those kicks, who knows how this fight could have gone. But alright, that's enough yapping. Let's break this fight down round by round and go over what really happened. I'll score each round and give my take on how I saw it. Now, the first round was even debatable for me. Pereira was landing the cleaner, harder shots and chopping away at Ankalaev's legs and setting the tone with those brutal calf kicks. Ankalaev, on the other hand, was just pressing forward without landing much. And look, I get that, I get that forward movement looks good to the judges, but if you're just walking into damage, that doesn't win you the round. The most important part of the judges is effective striking and damage, and Pereira did more than damage in that round. Simple as that. That's 1-0 Pereira. Round 2 is where Ankalaev really started to make his mark. He caught Pereira with a big shot, wobbling him, and had him on the back foot for a moment. That's significant damage, and in a fight where damage is supposed to be the primary scoring factor, that moment alone holds a lot of weight. But what made this round even more interesting was Ankalaev adjusting his striking approach. He was countering more, and he was starting to fire back with his own leg kicks and mixing in those sharp teeps to the body. Those kicks weren't just for show, they were landing clean and forcing Pereira to think twice about stepping in. This round was all about Ankalaev. He had the biggest moment with that punch that stunned Pereira, and on top of that, he was active, working on the legs and the body, slowing Pereira down. No debate here, round 2 goes to Ankalaev, and now we're tied 1-1. Then there's round 3, and this is where things get a bit tricky. Honestly, I think this round decided the entire fight. Pereira was still landing those big calf kicks and body shots, and Ankalaev kept pressuring forward. But here's the thing, pressure alone doesn't win fights. Just walking forward doesn't mean you're actually doing more damage. But this round was different from the first because Ankalaev wasn't just pressing forward, he was starting to make real adjustments. He was checking more kicks, throwing his own leg kicks back, and landing teeps to the body that were clearly bothering Pereira. And even though Pereira had some success, he wasn't really following up. He'll land a good kick or a good body shot here and there, but then he'd immediately reset instead of putting something behind it. Ankalaev, on the other hand, was dictating the exchanges, staying busier, and mixing up his attacks more. It wasn't like round 2 where he had a huge moment that rocked Pereira, but over the course of 5 minutes, he was just doing more work. That's what won him the round. Now, you can argue that Pereira was still landing the better shots, but he was too hesitant. Ankalaev was pressing forward, landing consistently, and making adjustments that slowed Pereira down. It wasn't the most dominant round, but it was enough to give Ankalaev the edge. That puts him up 2-1 going into round 4. Now we go to round 4, and this is where things get a little bit questionable. Ankalaev spent over 3 minutes of control time controlling Pereira against the cage, and I'm not going to argue that positional dominance, but here's the problem. He did absolutely nothing with it. If we're scoring based on damage first, this round should technically be a toss-up because holding someone against the cage without landing strikes or attempting submissions is not effective grappling. But since judges still reward control time, Ankalaev probably deserves this round under today's scoring reality. So fine, let's give it to Ankalaev. It's 2-2 heading into the final round. Then came round 5. If you're giving Ankalaev round 4 for control, then there's no way you're not giving round 5 to Pereira for landing the better shots. He picked up the pace, landing heavy strikes and controlled the exchanges. And unlike Ankalaev in round 4, Pereira worked, actually resulted in damage. So this was a no-brainer. This round was Pereira's. Now here's where we get to the real problem. If Pereira won round 1 and 5 and Ankalaev won round 2 and 4, then round 3 was the swing round, right? And if round 3 was as close as it looked, why did all 3 judges score it for Ankalaev? That's what makes this questionable. Even if one judge gave Pereira round 3, this would have been a split decision, which would at least make more sense. But all 3 judges scored it the same way, which tells me that they prioritize Ankalaev's forward pressure over Pereira's actual damage. They're likely still overvaluing control time, even when there's no damage is being done, and they ignored how the official scoring criteria actually is written. And that's the biggest issue here. Judges consistently follow their own rule book. And honestly, this fight deserves a rematch because let's not forget that Pereira completely shut down Ankalaev's wrestling. Think about it. Magomed Ankalaev's a guy who's known for having wrestling in his pocket. Obviously, he's more of a striker, but he couldn't take Pereira down even once. That alone is crazy impressive. Pereira forced Ankalaev to stand with him for mostly all 5 rounds. Yeah, they were stuck in the clinch here and there, but even though he lost, he was never in any real danger outside of round 2. Now you're probably asking what's next. It's probably a rematch, and if they run it back and Pereira makes a few small adjustments, throw more volume, stop backing up as much, and let his hands go early, he could absolutely win this rematch. And from a fan's perspective, this rematch makes a lot more sense than Ankalaev just moving on to another opponent, because if the UFC really want to clean up the judging mess, they should settle it with another fight. So was this a robbery? Not exactly, but it was a very questionable decision. Pereira absolutely has a case for winning, and if we're scoring damage first, he probably should have won 48-47. I mean, it's very debatable, but because judges still reward pressure and control more than they should, Ankalaev walked away with the belt. At the very least, it should have been a split decision, not unanimous, and that's the part that doesn't sit right with me. But what do you guys think? Did the right guy win, or do you guys see it differently? Let me know in the comments down below. Either way, it was just a phenomenal fight. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, and I get why Ankalaev won, but let's be real, it wasn't a robbery. It was close, and honestly, you can even make a case for calling it a draw. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, drop a like, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I appreciate all the support, and as always guys, I'll see you guys on my next one.